You help, listens attentively, remembers birthdays, sends a message when he notices someone is acting strange, invites, welcomes, and holds the chaos of others as if it were his duty to keep the whole world standing. You are always there, for everyone. Always strong, always available, always trying to lighten the other person's burden. But when you need, silence. It's not that others are cruel, they just don't realize it. You swallow, smile, say it's okay, because you already understand that if you collapse, no one will know what to do. You are the pillar, and pillars cannot crack. They cannot show tiredness. They cannot ask for a hug. And then comes that feeling that you don't know exactly how to name. It's not anger, it's silence. A heavy silence. Dense. As if your existence passed through the days like background noise. As if you shouted in a crowded room and no one heard. As if the care you offer the world had no mirror, no return, no embrace. You start to wonder, am I just good for taking care of others? Will I disappear if I stop giving? It is at this point that the knot tightens in the chest, because you don't want to stop being who you are. You don't want to harden, become someone cold and distant. But you also can't stand this imbalance anymore. This invisible weight of being the strong one that no one protects. You want to be seen. You want to be felt. You want someone, at least once, to realize that you need them too. That you also bleed, you also get tired, you also cry in secret. But it seems that it doesn't work, and then comes the cruelest thought of all. Maybe it's my fault. Maybe you think you're weak for feeling this way, that you should just settle, that you should give without expecting anything. That true love is like this, that being good means not bothering. But what if it isn't? What if this pattern, this cycle of giving and not being noticed, has much deeper roots? What if you're not just being ignored, but also unconsciously erasing yourself? Carl Jung said that what we don't look at in ourselves, we project onto others. Maybe this silence you feel isn't just external. Maybe it's coming from within. Maybe there's something inside you that learned, very early on, that in order to be loved, you had to disappear. This video is not about how to demand more attention. It's about understanding why you accepted so little, and why he came to believe that being invisible was the price of love. Because maybe, just maybe, this way of caring for others so intensely is, in fact, a veiled request for care. A request that was never answered, that was never heard, not even by you. But now perhaps is the time to listen, to look more deeply, and to discover what in you is still waiting to be seen. You feel like you only matter when you're caring for someone, as if your value is always in what you offer, never in who you are. This feeling is subtle, but devastating. It appears when you realize that you only receive messages when someone needs them. When "how are you" is always followed by a request, an urgency, a demand, and never by real interest. It appears when you are exhausted, but still get up to help. When you silence your pain to welcome that of others. When you smile on the outside, while on the inside, what you want most is for someone to see it. You see, not what you do, not what you deliver, not how useful you are, but you. But this almost never happens, and that's where the emptiness begins. A specific type of emptiness, that of effective self-denial. Because yes, there is such a thing, and you've probably been carrying this pattern for years. You learned, somewhere in the past, that to be loved, you had to disappear. That being light, being easy, being good, meant not bothering, not asking for too much, not demanding anything. Just being there, available, just serving. You were programmed to disappear on behalf of the other. Perhaps he learned this at home when he was still a child, when he noticed that when he cared, he was praised, that when he kept quiet, he was accepted, that when he didn't express his needs, he was mature, strong, admirable. And so, you were building a character, a caregiver, a solver, someone who holds all the plates, but is never asked to dance. You have become indispensable, and invisible. And this pain, although common, is more serious than it seems, because it undermines your identity. She convinces you, little by little, that loving is disappearing, that receiving is selfishness, that needing is weakness. But that is not love. That is an unconscious pact of invisibility. You were not born to be a bridge between others and life itself. You were born to cross yours. And when you feel like you only matter if you're doing something for someone, that's the clearest sign that something in you has gone astray, that the affection that should be unconditional has become conditioning. The pain you feel is not over-generosity, it is a lack of reciprocity. And the cruelest thing is that you learned not to charge, because deep down, you believe that you don't have that right. Because if you charge, you fear losing even what you receive. You fear appearing ungrateful. You fear being abandoned. But maybe it's time to break this cycle, to name this pattern, to recognize that there is an I inside you that has never been seen, not even by yourself. An I that no longer wants to just care, that wants to be cared for, that wants to exist. Not for what it does, but for what it is. And that in itself is already a revolution. What if this urge to compulsively care for others isn't just generosity? What if it's actually a reflection of the most forgotten part of you, the part that was ignored for so long, that learned to seek love by serving, that learned, silently, that affection only comes when you are useful, when you are needed, when you solve problems, when you are not a bother. You can call it empathy, you can call it altruism, you can call it kindness, but in many cases, this excessive care for others is just a cover for a wound that never healed, and that you try to hide with perfect attitudes. Carl Jung would call this affective projection. This is what happens when you try to give to someone else what you would actually like to receive. When you offer attention, but are deep down asking to be seen. When you listen patiently, but you're screaming inside, "Does anyone hear me?" When you console, but desperately long for a hug that never came. Projection is not a lie. It is a truth that has been diverted. You are indeed a sensitive person, caring, able to see the pain of others with depth. But when this sensitivity becomes compulsion, it reveals something deeper, an attempt to heal one's own abandonment by caring for the world. You wear the mask of being good. But behind this mask lives the wound of not being loved for oneself. And that has consequences, because the more you care without receiving anything, the more you become exhausted. The more you give without being recognized, the more you nullify yourself. And the more you nullify yourself, the more you feed the cycle of invisibility. Jung said that what we deny in ourselves, we project onto others, and what we ignore in our shadow becomes destiny. You are projecting your need for affection into actions. You are transforming your hunger for love into food for others. But no one notices that you are hungry because your pain comes wrapped in kindness. Your neediness comes disguised as strength. Your silence feels like balance, and the world believes. And you remain there, firm, functional, and empty. That's the break. What seemed like absolute virtue, your ability to care, maybe is in part a cry for help, a reflection of the child you were, the child who understood very early on that love only comes when you do everything right, when you please, when you sacrifice. But you're not that child anymore. And maybe now it's time to stop, to look at this dynamic with different eyes, to understand that loving is not disappearing, and that taking care of yourself with the same delicacy that you offer to the world is not selfishness. It is healing. Because deep down, what you always wanted wasn't to be needed. It was to be loved, and that changes everything. Everything we do not face within ourselves, we find in others as destiny. This is one of Carl Jung's most brutal quotes. And it wasn't written to console you, it was written to confront you. Because Jung wasn't an author who softened pain, he illuminated it. And in doing so, he showed that most of our kindest gestures may be masking deep, unconscious, unprocessed wounds. You take care of others. You are always there, attentive, offering comfort, guidance, presence. You notice the subtleties in other people's eyes. You know when someone is feeling unwell, even if they say everything is fine. You anticipate needs, manage chaos, and organize other people's worlds with emotional mastery. But what about you? Who takes care of you? Who notices your exhaustion? Who reads your silence like you read that of others? Jung would say that this excessive dedication of yours may not just be compassion. It could be a mechanism, an attempt by the unconscious to survive its own neglect. Because caring for others is easier and more acceptable than facing the emptiness you feel inside. It's more noble than admitting that you also feel alone, that you also want to be cared for, that you also have a hole in your chest that can't be filled with one more act of generosity. Jung saw this as effective projection. You project onto the other the part of yourself that has been forgotten. And by caring for the other so fervently, you unconsciously try to care for yourself. But it is an inverted care, a care that never reaches where it needs to, because it is directed outwards, and then you accumulate emotional debt. With yourself, you become the therapist who never allowed himself to be a patient, the shoulder that never leaned on anyone, the constant presence who lives with an internal absence, and it wears you out. It makes you sick, because caring for others without including yourself is a type of self-abandonment in disguise, and nobody notices, because you have learned to be impeccable, to be the emotional mainstay, to never overflow, to never ask, to never say, "Today, I am the one in need." But Jung warns us, everything we repress, everything we hide, everything we fail to look at, comes back. It comes back in the form of chronic fatigue. It comes back in the form of unbalanced relationships. It comes back in the form of emptiness, even in the midst of love. And then you realize that no matter how surrounded you are, you still feel alone. Not because the world has abandoned you, but because you didn't include yourself in the equation of affection. This is the time to look at this truth with courage, with humanity, and start, perhaps for the first time, to take care of yourself with the same tenderness you offer to others, because you also deserve what you deliver. And Jung knew, the encounter with the other is only true when it is born from the encounter with one's own self. You have become accustomed to giving. Giving time, affection, energy, presence, not because it was always easy, but because way back when, you learned that asking was wrong, that showing need was weakness, that being loved meant deserving, and to deserve, you had to serve. Be useful, be good, be strong. You have become everyone's support. The counselor, the shoulder, the emotional shield. You learn to position yourself where the other person needed you, not where you wanted you. Because deep down there was a fear, the fear that if you showed yourself completely, with your needs, with your desires, with your limits, it would be too much. You would be rejected, you would be left behind, and then you started shaping yourself. Fell silent. It was being what others needed, not what you were. And this strategy worked. You were loved. Or rather, you were needed. But there is a huge difference between being loved and being needed. Being needed makes you important, but being loved makes you human. And then the cycle begins. You plant attention, expecting to reap love. You listen, waiting to be heard. You care, waiting to be chosen. But almost no one realizes that behind your generosity lies a subtle need. Almost no one notices that while you comfort the other, inside you ask yourself, when will it be my turn? And when the other person doesn't reciprocate, when they don't see you with the same sensitivity with which you see the world, when they don't ask you how you are, the pain comes. But the pain is not new. It's old. very old. It's the same pain as when you fell and no one was there to pick you up. The pain when you cried, but learned to swallow it. The pain when you wanted something and had to keep quiet. Because there was no space. Because there was no listening. Because there was no hug. And now, unconsciously, you project onto the other the chance to heal this. You care, as if you were actually begging to be cared for. But this request is never said. It is insinuated. It is thrown out in the form of a gesture, of presence, of surrender, and this creates tension, because the other person feels that there is something beyond, but does not understand what, and you feel that you are asking, but no one responds. This is the drama of projection. You give, hoping to receive what you never had the courage to ask for clearly, and when you don't receive it, you get frustrated. And when you get frustrated, you close yourself off. And when you close yourself off, you feel even more alone. It's a cycle, a silent cycle, almost invisible, but corrosive. And the only way to break it is to stop trading love for service. Stop thinking that to be worthy of affection, you need to deny yourself, because you can and should care. But not as a strategy to be seen. Caring should be an expression of someone who is full, not of someone who is empty. And perhaps now, with this awareness, you can begin to reverse this logic and give yourself what you have always expected from others. Not because the other doesn't matter, but because you matter too. What if you are using your kindness to hide from yourself? This question is not simple, and it does not come to accuse you. It comes to open you up, because maybe what you call kindness, altruism, empathy, giving, is, in part, a sophisticated escape, a legitimate but disguised way of not facing something inside you that scares you. What if the fear of being seen and perhaps rejected is so great that you've learned to disappear for the sake of others? Being truly seen requires vulnerability. It requires showing your flaws, your desires, your limits, your contradictions. And for someone who learned from a very young age that love comes with conditions, this can be unbearable. So you hide, behind the force, behind the "it's all good," behind constant help. You become a kind of mirror for others, always reflecting what they need, always molding yourself according to what the other feels, wants, expects. But what about you? Who are you when you're not taking care of anyone? This question is scary, because often the answer is, I don't know. You don't know what you like, what you want, what really makes you feel good, because you spent so much time outside of yourself, focused on others, that you disconnected from your own essence. You have become an identity built on utility. If you are not being useful, you feel empty. If you're not helping, you feel invisible. If you're not offering something, you feel like you don't deserve anything. And that is a profound kind of self-abandonment. Jung said that the soul suffers when it lives in disagreement with its true self, and yourself is not just a caregiver. It is multiple. It feels anger. It feels fear. It desires. It needs. It makes mistakes. It fails. It wants to be held. It wants to be loved not for what it does, but for who it is. But you repress all of that and call it maturity. You disguise the pain of not being seen, saying that it's just the way people are. You hide the frustration of never receiving what you give, saying that you don't expect anything in return. But that's not true. You wait, yes. You do need it, yes. And that's okay. The problem is not needing. The problem is denying it. It's living for the sake of others as if it were a virtue, when in fact it's fear. Fear of stopping, looking at yourself, and realizing that you no longer know how to exist without someone's support. Maybe now is the time to face that emptiness, not as weakness, but as an opportunity, because only when you dare to exist outside of the role of caregiver can you discover who you truly are. And this reunion, as scary as it may seem, could be the beginning of everything. You are not weak for feeling this way. It is not weak to feel tired of caring. You are not ungrateful for wanting to be taken care of too, and it is definitely not selfish to want to be seen, felt, recognized. Actually, you are strong. Strong enough to begin to realize, with pain and lucidity, that care became a shield. That your kindness, in many moments, was the most refined armor to protect something more intimate. Your unheard need, your denied loneliness, your deep fear of not being loved if you were not always serving. And now the real challenge begins. Not the challenge of continuing to be a support for the world, but to offer yourself everything you have always offered to others. This is where the journey takes a different turn. Because up until now, love has been flowing outward from you, toward friends, family, colleagues, strangers who needed a shoulder to cry on. But the well has dried up, and that's not a failure. That's a call, a sign that it's time to come back. To come back to yourself. Jung would say that the return to the self, to the center of the psyche, involves the integration of what has been repressed, exiled, forgotten, and what has been exiled in you, perhaps for too long, was precisely your need for affection. You have become too functional, too strong, too decisive, and this has distanced you from your essence, because no one was born to be just useful. The soul cannot bear to live only in function. The soul wants to belong, want to rest, wants to be touched. And the first gesture of healing begins with you. It starts when, in the midst of fatigue, you ask yourself, what can I do for myself? Now, not to please, not to look good, but to truly welcome. Maybe it's a break, maybe it's a firmly said no. Maybe it's making a coffee and sitting alone, with your hand on your chest, acknowledging that there is pain, but also a heart that still beats with the desire to love and be loved. This is the reconnection with the real self, the one who exists even when he is not being useful, the one who stays, even when he's not solving anything. You deserve the same love you give, the same care, the same listening, not as a reward, but as a right. Because true self-love doesn't come from looking in the mirror. It comes from practice. If included, to see. Remember, to finally offer yourself the presence you always sought in the eyes of others. And it is with this awareness that everything can change. Because, as Jung said, what you resist persists. What you accept transforms. Accept the pain of being invisible. Accept the call to see yourself again and allow yourself from now on to be completely. Now, close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath and allow yourself to get in touch with a part of you that has perhaps been silent for too long. The part that still waits, that still desires, that still searches. Grab a pen and paper. This is not a trivial exercise. It is a ritual of self-knowledge, a gesture of listening. Because only when we give shape to what is hidden can we begin to transform it. At the top of the sheet, write, "To whom have I given my care?" Now below that, write the names of 3 people you constantly help. 3 names. They can be family, friends, colleagues, people who in some way you always put as a priority, people for whom you give yourself care and anticipate. He wrote, now next to each name, answer with almost brutal sincerity. What do I secretly hope to receive from them? Not what you say out loud, not what you think is right to want, but what you really want, even if you've never had the courage to admit it. Maybe you expect recognition. Perhaps you expect gratitude. Maybe you expect reciprocity, attention, affection, listening, presence. Maybe you expect to be seen, not as what you solve, but as what you also feel. Right? No filters, no judgments. This is your key, because these silent expectations are not weakness. They are clues, signs of a part of you that still seeks love where perhaps it never received enough, that still places hope in bonds that may not have space to welcome you completely. And it hurts, but it also frees, because when you name that projection, it stops controlling you. You stop repeating the pattern automatically. You stop expecting from others what only you can. First of all, Start offering to yourself. And that's what this exercise reveals. The part of you that is still searching needs, first of all, to be heard by you. The name you wrote, maybe it represents someone who will never give you what you expect, but it could also be a reflection of something deeper, the need to return to yourself, to start seeing yourself, to offer you the recognition, attention, and affection that you have been outsourcing for years. From this awareness, something changes. You don't have to stop caring, but now you can take care of it with balance. You can donate without emptying. You can say yes without disappearing. You can begin to break this cycle of neediness disguised as kindness because you saw, you recognized it, and that is already the beginning of the cure. This paper you have in your hands now is not just an exercise, it's a mirror. And perhaps by looking at it, you will begin to see more clearly the face of the one who has always been trying to come back. You. The encounter with the other is the encounter with what we lack. Carl Jung. This sentence seems simple, but it carries a deep and often uncomfortable reflection, because you don't connect with others just because of your affinities. You connect because, in some way, you are trying to fill something that was left open, something that was denied, something that still hurts. You find in the other the hope of finding within yourself what you did not learn to sustain alone, and that's why it hurts so much when you feel invisible. When you help care, offer your presence, and yet no one sees you, because your kindness, however genuine, carries a silent question. Will someone please see me? But now, maybe you're seeing things differently. Your pain is not just because of what the other person didn't give you. It's because of what you still hide in an attempt to be accepted. You have learned to silence parts of yourself, hiding weaknesses, to shape your behavior so as not to bother, not to weigh, not to scare. But the price for this is high. Because when you hide who you are to be loved, the love you receive never reaches you completely. It touches the role you play, not the soul you truly carry. And that gets tiring. It's too tiring. You start to feel like you did at the beginning of this video, screaming in a crowded room, and no one hears you, because the voice that echoes is not yours. It is the version you learned to offer. But now, with everything you've seen, felt, and recognized, perhaps it's time to try a new gesture. Show yourself, not to the whole world at once, but perhaps here, in this space of words, of stories, of silent encounters between strangers who carry similar wounds. Do you feel like no one sees you? So write in the comments, what part of you do you still hide to be loved? Maybe it's a weakness, maybe it's anger, maybe it's an unspoken desire, a stifled sensitivity, a pain that you forcefully hide. No need to explain everything, no need to justify, just write. Because when you write, something changes. You transform the invisible into matter. You give a name to the silence. You say, with one sentence, that there is still someone inside waiting to be recognized, and in doing so, you begin to see yourself. This space can be more than a comments box. It could be a symbolic confessional, an altar of small but real truths, a place where you start to stop being just a caregiver and start being whole. Right. And maybe, just maybe, by sharing what you hide, you will begin to be seen in truth, just in case. And who knows, by others who were also waiting for a safe place to show themselves.